The My Hero Academia fanbase has speculated who Deku's father was for years. This man had so many dad theories that it was absolutely insane. And when we finally found out that it was just some random guy, I'm pretty sure we all felt a little bit disappointed. And so I decided, you know what if All For One actually was Izuku's dad? So now we're here with the what if of the day. But quickly guys, if you guys want to hear about what would happen if All Might was Izuku's dad, click on the card above. There will be a movie version for that as well. That said though, ladies and gentlemen, the like goal for today's video is not going to really be anything, but I would appreciate it if you guys were to leave a like, considering that the algorithm has been absolutely effing me lately. I mean, it's been not pushing my videos out. I'm pretty sure you guys can tell from the views recently, and a like would be very much so appreciated. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Izuku Midoriya, the son of All For One. How should I start this what if? Well, I think that telling you guys who the parents of Izuku are going to be would probably be a waste of my time. It's obviously going to be Inko and All For One. So yeah. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, this is before All For One had his face entirely mangled by one of All Might's punches. And me personally, I think that that's actually kind of funny. Like the fact that All Might punched this man ugly is kind of crazy. But yeah. Pretty much before the incident, Inko would have done the thing with All For One, and you know, they had a child. But after the child was born, in G-like fashion, All For One straight up disappeared. He really said, let me go get the milk, and just never came back, right? And so Izuku in this time would end up growing up without a father. But eventually the time would come when he would meet a young kid by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. And everything in the canon storyline is pretty much the same. Just take Izuku's father out of the picture and have Inko actually working a job, and everything's the same. Izuku still is going to be great friends with Katsuki Bakugo, and they're going to be best friends, seeing as Katsuki won't be developing a quirk anytime soon. And you guys might be like, what do you mean he's not developing a quirk? Well, let me explain. So because Izuku is actually going to be the son of All For One, there is going to be a massive change to the story. And that change is going to be that Izuku is going to be inheriting All For One, except because he's inheriting a quirk and he's a son and he passed it down, and the quirk evolution theory is actually true. Quirks get stronger the more and more that they get passed down, eventually getting to a point where it would cause immediate destruction of the person's body, because it's like they'll get so powerful that they won't even be able to control it in their bodies, right? But for now, Izuku is able to control it, and he has a version of One For All where he can essentially steal the quirk and make it even more powerful than the original wielder actually can have and use it. So that's how essentially Izuku is going to be using his quirk, and this is how Izuku would pretty much end up taking Bakugo's quirk as a kid. And you guys might be like, so does Bakugo know he has a quirk before he takes it? And no, because Izuku would have unknowingly actually taken Bakugo's quirk, and so because Bakugo never knew he had his quirk stolen from him, Izuku, when Bakugo and them were kids, Bakugo never found out he had a quirk, and since Izuku didn't even show any signs of developing a quirk because he didn't understand how it worked, he would have eventually ended up going to the quirk doctor to find out that, well, he has no quirk, or so is what the doctor would tell him. And immediately, as soon as he registers what Izuku's quirk is, he would have immediately gone back to All For One and informed him of this, as All For One would formulate a plan to essentially take Izuku back and raise him as his own. Now, this would mean that Izuku would actually be raised by All For One, and because of this, Izuku would actually end up getting kidnapped from Inko. The next day at the grocery store, Izuku and his mom would have pretty much been going out, and Inko wouldn't be none the wiser. As you know, she receives a call, and it would actually be All For One telling her that he wants to see his son, and that, you know, she's going to be out of the picture. And you know, Inko's like, what? But then she gets covered in a bag, and Inko pretty much gets flown across the country, leaving everything behind. Like literally nobody finds out what happened, and Izuku would just be taken by some guy who would be pretending to be a hero, taking him for an autograph. Izuku, being a small kid and not understanding anything, would end up being taken away, and thus Izuku would wake up inside of a strange area. He wakes up in this strange room with this man in a mask in front of him, and Izuku would then be told by him that his mom died. Izuku immediately starts breaking down because it's like, bro, like your mom just died. Like, what do you expect a kid to do? But anyways, he starts breaking down, right? And he would show him a fabricated video of Inko essentially getting ran over in the street as she was looking for Izuku. As All For One would laugh internally, and he would decide that this is finally his big break. He's gonna use his own son to get exactly what he wants. With two All For One users, he'll be unstoppable. And now, Izuku would spend his early years essentially just working on his quirk and taking the quirks of many people who he would grow up with that All For One would see as disposable people. He'd be subjected to the evils of villainy, which he would hate from an early age because Izuku at this point already had it embedded inside of him that he wanted to become a hero. So growing up, he would hate his dad, but know not to say anything because he's seen what his dad would be willing to do to some of his closest men. He'll just kill them and have them replaced the next day. What's stopping his dad from replacing him and killing him again and again and again? Like nothing is. And Izuku is terrified of that. So he would continue to train and get stronger, taking more quirks until eventually the day comes where he finally turns about the age of 14. And during these years, Izuku would have been enrolled in a normal school, and Izuku would have gotten his grades up and would also be working on his quirk, inevitably going back to different schools and stealing the quirks of certain people, as those people would end up going missing after All For One would get rid of them from the picture so nobody knows that Izuku was the one who actually stole the quirks. Izuku's first years would not exactly have been fun, and oftentimes All For One would have to scream at Izuku and tell him that he's doing what he's doing for a better world. Right? He tried to give Izuku the ideals that he holds himself, but Izuku just never fell for it. He never once swayed in his belief of heroes, in his belief of All Might. Izuku just kept praying that someday All Might would save him. Someday somebody would come and rescue him from this horrible life that he's had. But simultaneously, another person who would have also been affected by the fact that Izuku is the son of All For One would be Katsuki Bakugo, who would have never ended up developing a quirk. This means that his upbringing and overall childhood would have changed a lot. Before, he would have been hailed as perfect and a hero and could never do any wrong because of the fact that he was, had one of the most powerful quirks ever in his school and everything, and he was constantly praised. This time, people were always telling him about how he shouldn't even try to become a hero, and Bakugo just kept telling everybody that he doesn't care, that he's stronger than everybody, because Bakugo would have, instead of like Izuku and just like fallen backwards and just given up, Bakugo would have decided to instead become the #1 hero, or at least a hero without a quirk, because Bakugo says that he doesn't need one, that he's already plenty strong and he won't be needing something like that to make him be capable of becoming a hero. Bakugo doesn't care about that stuff, and he would live an Asta-like life where he would do his absolute best and train physically with calisthenics and weightlifting, as well as martial arts training, to get himself up to par with all those other people who have quirks. During his early years, he would be very strong in comparison to the other kids, but as the time would go by, Bakugo would realize that he's slowly beginning to fall behind, and he would barely be able to make it, barely be able to decide that he's going to be even taking the recommendation exam. The UA entrance exam. And at the same time, Izuku would also be taking the entrance exam to get into UA. Now, at this time, Izuku would get dropped off by one of the limos of All For One, and Izuku would end up getting out of the car as one of the villains in the front seat would tell him, "Good luck. Break a bone out there, kid," laughing as he drives off, and Izuku would simply say, "Yeah, whatever." He would end up walking inside of the room, and finally, when he's inside of there, he would notice one boy that would have immediately caught his eye, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku would think, "Bakugo? Is that Kachan?" And so after the exam, Izuku decides that he definitely wants to catch up with Bakugo and maybe talk to him a little bit. So the exam thing would start, and what would Izuku do? Well, Izuku would first off start everything by filling out the written portion, right? And since this time Izuku isn't like muttering, Ida wouldn't feel the need to call him out. And essentially Ida would be the only one to try to call out President Mike, who would simply shut him down immediately and embarrass himself. But as soon as that happens, everybody's finally told to make their way outside. And this right here, this is when President Mike would explain to everybody that, well, this is the robot portion and the 2 and 1 and 3 point power system, with the 0 pointer being a thing. And Izuku would use his multiple quirks to essentially destroy every single robot. Now, would Izuku use everything? No, he doesn't use everything. There's one specific quirk that Izuku likes to use more than any others, and it's his explosion quirk, the one that he would have actually ended up taking from Bakugo all those years ago that he never even knew he took. But since it's his earliest quirk and the first one that he started working on, it's the most powerful quirk that Izuku has at his disposal. And so what Izuku would end up actually doing is essentially using that quirk to get around the same level of robot points that Bakugo would have got in the original, in the same destructive like fashion, with the same exact talent and fighting style that Bakugo kind of would have developed. Except Izuku's would be a lot more destructive and a lot more calculated and precise, seeing as he would grow up with genuine people who are like so good at destroying things. I mean, for Christ's sake, they're villains. So he would definitely be able to do everything that he wants to easily and rapidly. It would be as if it's nothing to him. And Izuku would go through and end up passing, getting about 30 more robot points than Bakugo would have gotten in the original. Once the 0 pointer comes out, because Izuku is still going to be the person that he is in the original, like he still has the heart of a hero deep down inside of him, which he doesn't usually display. Once he sees that Uraraka would be about to get crushed by a gigantic robot, he would blitz on in there with his explosion quirk and proceed to essentially save her, as he would get her out of the way before the 0 pointer could crush her and thus take her to Recovery Girl, where everybody would watch in awe as he just did such an act of heroism that none of them even thought of doing. They all just ran away and just left somebody defenseless. Some people would think to themselves they're not worthy of being heroes, and that's exactly right, they're really not. But once Izuku saves her, he would say, "You all right?" And she nods. She's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And from here, Izuku goes on to pretty much walk away, making his way towards the exit of UA, as he waits for a certain Katsuki Bakugo to make his way there, right? Izuku from here goes on to go towards Bakugo and be like, "Hey Bakugo," or not really. He would say, "Hey Kachan," as you know, Bakugo turns around and he's like, "Kachan?" He turns around and immediately recognizes. He's like, "Nobody's called me that," but he turns and sees the green hair and the green eyes, and he would be like, "Izuku, I didn't expect to see you." As from here, Izuku looks to Bakugo and he would be like, "Yeah, it's been a while, man. Haven't seen you since I was like 4 years old. Wow, it's crazy how much time has passed since then." And Bakugo would say, why are you here?" And Izuku would say, "Oh, moved back in town. I'm living with my dad now, since my mom ended up passing away a couple years ago." That's a lie. She was just taken away to another country where she had no contact with Japan, and All For One would burn her existing papers and documentations, so she can never make her way back, right? So Inko was just stuck in the US and can't do anything. Literally. She had to learn a new language, and she had to do so much to even stay afloat. Luckily, however, she was given a bunch of money by All For One to just stay silent, and so she had to just start a whole new life away from her beloved Izuku and never being able to see him grow up any further than the age of 4. It would be often times where she misses him, but she can't do anything about it, seeing as she knows now that her would-be husband was actually a supervillain. Now though, Izuku would be growing up with him and she would only wish him the best. But Izuku would have a conversation with Bakugo and it would go something like this, right? Like they're catching up, they're talking about how they've been. Bakugo would be telling Izuku how he never actually developed the quirk and how he's not really quite sure how it happened, but it doesn't matter seeing as he doesn't need one. Bakugo would then explain what his parents' quirks are, and Izuku, once hearing what his parents' quirks are, he would say, wait, so that's your parents? And like, it would be at that moment that it would finally click in Izuku's head where he got the explosion quirk. He had to have stolen it from somebody. He knew that all those years ago once he had his quirk explained, but he never knew who he stole the quirk from. But now seeing Bakugo standing before him and telling him his parents' quirks and stuff like that, Izuku's memories would trigger as he looks to Bakugo and would just think, there's no way. It was me. I took his quirk. And Izuku would just be sitting there in this like disbelief like state as he looks to Bakugo and would just feel like sorry. He would end up inevitably taking down Bakugo's number and making his way back home, telling him that they'll have to catch up in UA once they both get in. Bakugo nods and would barely end up making it into Class 1A. Eventually the day would come where Izuku has to walk into the classroom and meet all of his classmates, but Izuku during this time would have been far more preoccupied with the fact that he literally probably ruined his best friend's life, seeing as he stole his quirk without even knowing it, and he was the one who was using his quirk this entire time instead of Bakugo. He probably would have lived such a better life if he had one of those. And Izuku would just feel so sorry, wanting to tell him but unsure if he should, seeing as if he tells him, he's not sure how he'll react. Like maybe he'll be thankful that he finally gave him his quirk back and just forgive him easily, or he might hate him. And Izuku just doesn't know. But I'm actually going to be leaving that choice up to you guys. Should Bakugo resent Izuku for taking his quirk all those years ago, or should Bakugo be forgiving of Izuku because of the fact that now, without a quirk, he wasn't able to use that as a crutch and made himself so much more powerful without it? And should Izuku give it back to him? Or, like the other one where, he just hates him. But regardless though, we jump back into the story, and Izuku, as of this current moment in time, would essentially just be sitting down wondering to himself what he should do. Should he A, give it back, or B, just not tell him the truth, right? And so Izuku just decides to stop thinking about it, makes his way home, and all for one would just be patiently waiting for the letter to come in, seeing as he knows that his son must have definitely got into UA with the quirk that he has. Or more specifically, with the quirk that he uses, aka stole from Bakugo. That said though, essentially the day would come where finally Izuku would essentially be in the classroom, and he would immediately be greeted to Bakugo, who would be like, hey Izuku, sit over here. He tells Izuku to sit next to him, and Izuku would sit there and be like, what's up Bakugo? And every time, they talk, like Izuku would kind of not be able to look Bakugo in his eyes. Eventually though, Aizawa would wake up, and once he does, he would be like, alright kids, put these on and meet me outside. He does so, and Izuku would go on to essentially make his way outside after having changed and pretty much be like, so what are we doing out here? Aizawa would then go over to throw the ball at Izuku, and Izuku would use an explosion to essentially throw the ball straight as far as he possibly can at the direction of the sky, right? Now, following this, he would get a pretty good score in terms of like how many meters he had thrown it, and All Might would actually be impressed because he would be watching from the sidelines. Bakugo, as of this current moment, would then go up and get mediocre scores, barely being able to stay in the class, with Aizawa kind of being like, if you want to be around, don't be a crutch to us and don't hold us back, quirkless kid. I believe in you, but you're going to have to work 10 times as hard as everybody else. And Bakugo would be up for the challenge. It's at this moment that Izuku would then go on to essentially complete the rest of the tests. And after this, Izuku would then go forth to essentially go towards the direction of where, Bakugo goes when he's about to leave. Bakugo from here would begin talking to some kid with red hair, and he would begin telling him how manly he is and yada yada yada. And so Izuku decides, you know what, he'll maybe tell Bakugo some other day. From here, he would go off and make his way towards the bathroom when suddenly he bumps into All Might, and Izuku would immediately be like, All Might, it's you. Could I get an autograph? Immediately starts fanboying over All Might in the way that you guys would imagine, and All Might would immediately be like, sure thing, kid. You know what I mean? And from here they both pretty much end up talking for a bit, and Izuku then thinks to himself, should he tell All Might? Should he tell All Might the truth, or should he just keep living this lie? So Izuku would look to All Might and say, All Might, can I please talk to you? From here, All Might would say, of course, young man, you can tell me anything. I'm one of your teachers now. Izuku then looks at him and says, please, All Might, this is something serious. This is regarding All For One. All Might, as soon as he hears the name All For One, would immediately lose his demeanor that he previously had. It's almost as if his smile immediately is just taken away from his face, and he then looks to the direction of Izuku as he grabs him with each shoulder and proceeds to say, "How do you know that name?" Izuku would look to the direction of All Might and say, "Just trust me, All Might. I need to talk to you in private." Following this, All Might says, "I don't know what this is, but I need you to tell me everything you know concerning that man." As from here, he proceeds to take Izuku to a room where All Might and Izuku can have a private conversation, right? And they go to All Might's office, where immediately All Might would sit down and look out the window as he says, "I haven't heard that name in years. And the last time that I saw him, well, it's been even longer." But he would then turn towards the direction of Izuku and say, "Now, tell me, what do you need to talk to me regarding that man?" As Izuku looks to the direction of All Might and says, "Listen, All Might, this might come as a surprise, but I need you to listen to me and understand." As All Might says, "I'll listen, but I can't promise to understand anything." As Izuku sighs and says, "You know what? Fine, I can understand that. Look, All Might, I'm the son of All For One." And immediately All Might looks to the direction of Izuku and says, "He had a son?" And then he would immediately get on guard, like just looking at him saying, "What are you here for and what are your intentions?" And Izuku would say, "Calm down, All Might. I'm on your side. I hate that man. He ruined my entire childhood." He would then look at All Might, as All Might would like look at him and sit down with his guard all the way up, right? And Izuku would just say, "Look, All Might, this is how everything played out. All I know is that a couple of years ago, I'm presuming before your incident with All For One, that my father ended up meeting my mother and having me. Following that, a couple years later, 4 to be exact, as soon as I was born, I ended up discovering that I inherited the quirk All For One. However, because I inherited it through the process of having another kid, I actually ended up having a stronger version than even my father's. However, as things currently stand, he is still a much better user and has much better quirks under his disposal than I do. I think all he wants truly is to use me as a means to an end. He simply wants me to be right there with him so that his reign could never be questioned. But I don't believe in that, All Might. I never have, I never will. I believe in the hero society, and I have ever since I've been a little kid. You've always been my idol, All Might. I've always thought of you as some sort of god, and looking at you now in person, I can tell I wasn't wrong for thinking that. You truly are the one and only #1 hero of Japan." But following this, All Might would say, "So you're the son of All For One. How was that?" Izuku says, "Well, the first couple years I was born, I didn't even know I had a father. I mean, of course, I knew I had one, but he was never around. He disappeared long after meeting my mother and conceiving me. And once I turned 4 years old and went to the quirk doctor, I ended up meeting a doctor which actually seems to be working alongside All For One. This doctor ended up actually telling him about my existence and my quirk, and from here, my father was able to deduce that I was actually born from that night he had with my mother." Following this, he looks to All Might and says, "But that's not it, All Might. What ended up happening after that was something I'll never forget. We were in a grocery store one day and suddenly some guy came up to me asking if I wanted to take a picture. Me being a kid, I foolishly followed him, took a picture with him, and when I turned back, mother was gone. A bag was placed over my head and I ended up waking up in a different area. Then, that's when I saw him, the demon, my father. I can't tell you much about that, but all you have to know is that I was scared. And following the next couple of years of my life, I've been nothing but scared. But you know what, All Might? One thing has kept me going. And it's the thought that maybe someday the heroes would help me. Maybe someday you would save me. But I guess as time went on, slowly that thought dwindled away. And now I figured that now since I have you in front of me, I'd opt to take the third option. Save myself with your help. And now that you're here with me, I think that we have an amazing chance of stopping my father. He plans on assassinating you, All Might. Throughout one of our school endeavors, he's planning to take you out immediately, get you out of the picture, because the way he sees it, You're the only one that can stop him. One for all is the only thing stopping us. Or him. And All Might, after hearing all of this from Izuku, would be like, so, you didn't live too good of a life because of your father, did you? And Izuku says, not particularly. I spent my entire childhood around villains, learning how to control my quirk and even having to, it pains me to say this, but even kill a few people, just to show that I had what it takes. I've been working alongside some kid by the name of Shigaraki Tamura, and apparently he's the grandson of one of your predecessor, I believe. Nana Shimura, does that ring a bell? Following this, All Might would be like, that monster. He even got her family involved. He would crush his hand together as a ball of fist would come, and he would immediately look towards the direction of Izuku and ask him if that's all. Izuku would say, that's not it. I have more, but that's all I can tell you for now. All I know, All Might, is that my father will be watching very, very closely, taking an interest in everything and anything that I do. And I want you to promise me something, All Might. You'll be ready when the time comes. When the time comes that my father will come at you with full force, you need to be there to be able to handle the display of power that my father would throw at you. I may even have to get involved just to make it look like I'm on his side. But trust me, All Might. I'm with you. I'm with the heroes. I don't want to be cursed with a villainous life just because of my heritage. That's not what I want. I want to be a hero, All Might. Just trust me. Can we do that? And All Might would look at the direction of Izuku, smile and say, look, before you came to me and told me everything, I was completely in the dark. I might have died. But because you were brave enough, bold enough, and you had the heart of a hero big enough to sacrifice everything, your entire life, you gave me that chance to survive. And now, Izuku Midoriya, I promise that I'll make sure that not only do you survive, but you become a hero worthy of taking down your very own father. You will be my successor. And from here, Izuku is like, what? You're kidding. And from here, All Might is just like, I'm not kidding. Kid, you will be my successor. If he wishes to turn you into a demon and turn you into the most villainous thing in the world, then I will mold you into the greatest hero this world has ever known. You will be the light that shines in the darkest holes. You will be there to tell people that you are there. And from here, Izuku looks to All Might and is like, I'm the son of a villain. I could never take that quirk from you, All Might. Give it to somebody else, somebody more deserving. And All Might just looks at him and says, there's nobody else more deserving than you, young man. Placing a hand over his shoulder and telling him to eat this. As Izuku looks at him and he's like, what? It's a hair. And, Izuku's like, okay, I mean, I'll eat it, but it's like, are you pranking me, All Might? And All Might's like, no, you need to ingest my DNA. And Izuku's like, there's probably easier ways to do this, but he eats the thing, and from here, he ends up taking the quirk of One for All. Following this, Izuku would end up looking to All Might as he would tell him that this is not the only thing he needs to tell him. Telling All Might that he has a couple more demons in his closet that he has to face, and that for now, he's on his road to redemption to change everything that his father has done to ruin All Might's life. He promises, swears to All Might that this time, the villains don't win. They lose, just like always. All Might smiles, and from here, Izuku would leave the room as he would make his way back to the lair where he would be greeted by his father and a couple of goons, where he would go back and begin training for another day. The next day would arrive, and on this day would definitely be taking place the heroes versus villains incident, right? Now, on this day, what would end up happening is Izuku walks into class and nothing really out of the ordinary happens until All Might ends up busting through the door being like, I am here, coming through the door like a normal person, right? All Might just comes in and immediately we just pretty much have All Might and Izuku just kind of like nodding at each other. As following this, All Might proceeds to teach his lesson of the day, and everybody just gets paired up into teams. Now, Izuku this time around is actually going to be getting paired up with Uraraka, and he's actually going to be having to face off against Ida and Bakugo himself, right? Now, Izuku, once he heard that he's going to be having to face off against Bakugo, would just be thinking to himself that he could not bring himself to take more away from Bakugo than he already has. He already stole his quirk. What else could Izuku even take from him at this point, right? But Izuku nonetheless gets into his position and would immediately begin searching for the bomb alongside Uraraka. Now, both of them begin to do so, and as this is happening, Ida and Bakugo would remain in the bomb room just waiting for their arrival. Immediately, Izuku and Uraraka would arrive to the door as Izuku busts it open and immediately comes shooting in with explosions, right? And, seeing this, Bakugo jumps out of the way as Ida grabs the bomb and moves its location. Uraraka would look to the direction of Bakugo as Izuku would tell her that all she has to do to win is touch him one time, make him float, and there's no way he'll be able to take us out. And from here, Uraraka's like, right, I can handle it, as she would rush in at the direction of Bakugo, and Bakugo just jumps over her. He's like, nope, kicking her right on the head as he does so, as he would then get into a martial arts like fighting position, and as she comes in and tries to touch him, Bakugo would pretty much make her look silly, make her look like a fool. He begins to dodge each and every single one of her attacks, and he's making her look like she's never fought a day in her life, like she's just like looking foolish out there. Nonetheless, though, we immediately see Bakugo essentially rushing in at Uraraka herself and then proceeding to essentially pummel her down onto the ground using the restriction, actually not even using restriction tape, but knocking her straight out and proceeding to essentially look at the direction of Izuku as he would blast an explosion off in the direction of Ida, who at this moment was trying to get closer to fight him off, but he literally just couldn't. And Izuku would then get tackled by Bakugo as Bakugo gets him down onto the ground and begins to throw a bunch of punches at Izuku, right? Izuku shoots an explosion at Bakugo, which would send him back hurtling flying, and Ida would come in with a reciprocal burst kick, trying to hit at Izuku's vital side, like he's trying to hit him like basically where his rib cage at. Now, the blow would be successful and Izuku would be sent flying at the wall as, right now he would just like pretty much crash and just, like it hurts, right? But he would get back up and Bakugo would look at him and say, come on, I can do this all day. As following this, Izuku smirks and says, all right, let's see you keep up now. Izuku shoots an explosion and immediately begins blitzing around Ida and Bakugo, so fast that either one of them couldn't react. He would end up actually grabbing Bakugo by the head and tossing him at the direction of Ida. Sorry guys, that was my phone. And, tossing him at the oh my god, I need to put this on silence. There we go, we're good. But he would grab Bakugo, right? And the way that I wanted to pick this for you guys to like genuinely get a cool idea of what happens is Izuku grabs Bakugo by the head, right? And then he grabs Ida and just boom with an explosion at both of their heads. Just bam, he like slams them both together, almost as if he was gonna slam his own hands together and just explode, but he makes their heads hit and then boom, explosion, as both of them get pretty much taken out immediately. And Izuku would go towards the bomb as he places one hand on it and immediately begins to be told that he is the winner by All Might, right? And once this happens, Izuku would smile as he says, huh, looks like that wasn't too hard. And following this, we pretty much would end up getting a really, really cool scene where Izuku's told that he's the winner and All Might would smirk at Izuku, being like, you did good out there, kid. And Izuku says, yeah, but at this moment, he's kind of preoccupied. That's why they were even able to land punches on him at all. Like, that's why Izuku is fighting in a sloppy manner. Because Izuku all day has just been thinking about how at the end of the day, he's going to have to tell Bakugo everything. And what better way to do this than to tell Bakugo right after school, right? Izuku asks All Might if he could borrow the classroom when everything's done. And All Might would say, sure, he doesn't see why not. But Izuku, following the battle, would end up going over to Bakugo and saying, yo, Bakugo, I actually have something to show you after class. Cool if you stick behind? And, Bakugo's like, yeah, sure, why not, Izuku? As, both of them would end up staying behind in the classroom. And once everybody's gone, All Might nods at Izuku and walks out of the classroom. Not even trying to spy or peek or anything, he genuinely trusts Izuku. But Izuku would look towards the direction of Bakugo and say, Bakugo, look, I need to tell you something. And because you guys actually ended up being the ones who voted for it, all I'm gonna say is Bakugo's gonna be getting his quirk back, all right? You guys voted and I looked at all your comments. Like, trust me guys, I saw them. I saw the people saying that Bakugo should stay mad. I saw the people saying that he should just get his quirk back and be a little upset, but you know, he earned his trust back. I saw all the comments, but the one that majorly looked like it won was the comment saying that Bakugo deserves to get his quirk back. And a lot of people were saying that he shouldn't get his quirk back because, you know, he still wants to be the first quirkless. But because of majority of votes, I think that we're going to be going with the option of he gets his quirk back, all right? But regardless though, Izuku looks at the direction of Bakugo and would say, there isn't really an easy way to say this, Bakugo. But do you remember when we were kids, around the age of 4 years old, I ended up not manifesting a quirk and you didn't either? Bakugo would say, yeah, of course. I mean, one of the worst times of my life, but why? Izuku would say, Bakugo, it's my fault you never developed a quirk. And Bakugo looks to Izuku and would be like, what are you talking about, Izuku? It can't be your fault. That's not how quirk work. You're just being dumb. And Izuku looks at him and he's like, Bakugo, I swear it was my fault. He then proceeds to tell him, look, when I was around the age of 4 years old, I had no idea I had this, but I actually was born with a quirk, and my quirk was the ability to steal others' quirks. And Bakugo immediately, once he hears this, he would immediately piece 2 and 2 together and say, wait, so that quirk you have, it's mine? And Izuku would look to Bakugo, look down at the ground and nod. As Bakugo looks to him, and this realization would kind of hit him like a train. Like, his whole life, he lived without a quirk, even though he could have had one. And Izuku looks at him and says, Bakugo, please just hear me out. When I was a kid, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea I even had a quirk. Just like you, I thought I was quirkless. But then, I ended up finding out that I had a quirk beyond my wildest imaginations. And that was when my mom was lost in time. Suddenly, my dad ended up taking care of me, and one day, I ended up stealing his quirk as well. Now, I have 2 quirks at my disposal that I never even asked for, Bakugo. Me taking your quirk wasn't on purpose, but now I have the ability to give it back to you, Bakugo. I can make you stronger, give you rightfully what's yours. You can finally have your explosion quirk back and truly be the hero that everybody knows you can be. Bakugo would just sit there silent, right? Like, the room tension would be high and Bakugo would just be having his arms down with a shadow kind of covering his eyes so that Izuku could just not tell what Bakugo was really going to do next. But suddenly, Bakugo would look to Izuku and say, nah, you keep it, Izuku. You keep the quirk. I don't need it. The past couple of years may not have been hard, but you taking my quirk away, you know, it gave me one thing back. It gave me strength to believe in myself, not just some quirk. I didn't have the burden of having something like that. And after years of telling everybody that I would be the first quirkless hero, what would it do if I just decided to take it back? And Izuku looks at Bakugo and says, it's not about that, Bakugo. You were never meant to be a quirkless hero. You were meant to be the greatest of us all. This is your quirk, Bakugo. And now, I think it's time that you have it back. As Izuku would immediately place his hand on Bakugo and would forcefully give the quirk back, as Bakugo would be like, what are you doing? And Izuku would immediately just shine a red light on Bakugo as bam, that quirk would be right into Bakugo, and Bakugo would clutch his fist as he would say, this feeling. It's been years since I felt like this. When I was about 4 years old, I felt power inside of me, but I figured that it was just a fluke. That was my quirk all along, wasn't it? And Izuku looks at him and says, it's always been your quirk, Bakugo. I just borrowed it for a bit, made it stronger, and now you have a quirk even more powerful than what you would have developed originally. Hopefully your body will get accustomed to it, but I recommend not using it in school for a bit, considering that people might get a bit suspicious. Just keep pretending that you're quirkless for now, and soon show them the truth. As for me, well, I have a backup quirk that's very, very similar to your own explosion quirk. I ended up creating a quirk that allowed me to copy quirks, so I basically made a secondhand copy of yours, not as powerful, but I'll still be able to use the quirk. And Bakugo would look at Izuku and say, you know, Izuku, had you never told me that, I would have never known. I'm glad you told me, but I don't know how I feel about you giving the quirk back. I'm not sure what to do or what to say, but thanks. And from here, Izuku would just look to Bakugo as he says, don't mention him. There's also something else I have to tell you, but I don't know if the time is right. And Bakugo would look at him and say, you know, Izuku, take your time. As from here, he would proceed to essentially walk out, and Izuku and Bakugo would have a normal conversation, almost as if nothing has happened. Izuku from here would end up reporting back to All For One, who would ask him how school is, as Izuku would say, oh, you know, same old, just a bunch of losers trying to become heroes. You know, immediately snaps into his villain persona, and All For One asks him if there's anything interesting happening soon. Izuku would then smirk and say, the USJ. All For One would smile after hearing Izuku tell him of the details about the USJ, and once done, All For One would command Kurogiri to come in front of him. This is when Kurogiri would appear in front of All For One, and it's at this moment that Izuku would look at the direction of Kurogiri before nodding and then beginning to express a lot of details about the USJ event and how everything is pretty much going to be broken down and how the students are all going to practice their fields of rescuing, right? Now, immediately as soon as Kurogiri gets briefed in on this, All For One would proceed to tell Kurogiri to get as many men as possible and take a Nomu, that Izuku is actually going to be the one who kills All Might. But, and this is a very, very, very strong but Izuku would look to the direction of All For One and say, Father, don't you think it would be in our best interest to keep me as a just in case of emergency? I vote that we let Shigaraki actually take over and for him to be the one who's actually going to be in charge of the entire League of Villains organization for now. And All For One would say, that is a smart idea. From here, he would proceed to call Shigaraki in, and it's at this moment that Shigaraki walks in and proceeds to essentially look at Izuku, nod, and be like, I will be in charge for now then. Now I will prove that I'm far better than you. You know what I mean? Like, Shigaraki has like this low-key hatred for Izuku because it's like, he's the son of All For One. He already has the quirk that he wants, that he is quote unquote promised someday by All For One, seeing as he's going to be his successor, but Izuku's going to be his son. You know what I mean? Like All For One is just going to take over Shigaraki's body, but Izuku, that's going to be his right-hand man. That said, All For One, I don't think is expecting the betrayal that's going to be coming sometime soon. And also, I do apologize if I pause throughout the video. It's just to get like a little bit of air because like I said at the beginning of the video, it's a struggle to breathe right now because both of my nostrils are just clogged up to the max, and it's hard. Okay, it's hard. Okay, just let's leave it at that. But regardless though, what ended up happening following this is essentially after all the details would be briefed on the USJ, we then have Izuku returning back to school where he would essentially go back to normal studies and tell All Might about the incident with the USJ. How All For One is actually planning to essentially, you know, attack. And for this exact reason would be why All Might is actually going to be tagging along with them in the first place, and the reason that Aizawa is actually going to be bringing one extra powerful hero with them just to watch everything and see how things go down. Meaning that Izuku's information is going to be off just a tad bit because the only change that's going to happen is that one extra hero is going to tag along, right? And for that reason, All For One shouldn't get like, how do I put this? All For One shouldn't begin to question anything because it's just one dude. Like, would you question something if just one thing was off? Actually, oh man, dude, hearing myself say that, I'm like, oh yeah, I would question him. But like, think about it though, like just one extra hero in a place where heroes should be, like just to watch the students, I think it kind of makes sense. But regardless though, what pretty much ends up happening is they make their way towards the USJ, right? And Ida proceeds to tell them all to get off the bus and yada yada yada. They end up making their way there, and in the original, Kurogiri would just appear in front of everybody and begin to essentially tell them all about the fact that they're all, you know, they're all going to be crashing the party. This is when Kurogiri normally is supposed to just create a portal, and Bakugo and Kirishima are supposed to blast in with one with an explosion and one with a hardening quirk. But this time, we have All Might there, and not to mention Izuku, who knows of Kurogiri's weakness. So All Might would actually be able to blitz up there as fast as possible and give a mean right hook to the direction of Kurogiri right at the weak spot. Not hitting the shadows or anything, but hitting him right on that metal piece that Kurogiri has that can actually be damaged, right? And when Kurogiri gets hit there, this is when we would end up actually getting All Might restraining Kurogiri and looking to Ida as he would say, Ida, go find other heroes. as All Might would look to the direction of 13 and Aizawa, as well as the pro hero Snipe, and say, let's do this, as all of them would immediately jump down and they begin to face off against the villains, with 13 actually being in charge of the kids and getting them out of the USJ. A couple people would actually want to stay behind and be like, we can help, but Ida would be rushing off to go get the other heroes. Now the thing that they would have done is actually this time the heroes would have been a lot closer and they would have gotten there with way more speed than in the original. So in approximately 5 minutes, the heroes are actually all going to be arriving, and thus this would mean Izuku, All Might, and Snipe, as well as Aizawa, would all be in charge of holding off every single villain that's there until the pro heroes get there, right? Now, in the original, the students were actually the ones responsible for handling a lot of the villains. I mean, Momo, Jiro, and Kaminari handled an entire portion by themselves, not to mention Todoroki, and Bakugo and Kirishima were actually in charge of handling another platoon, with Izuku single-handedly, actually not really, because he did get help from Tsuyu, but pretty much single-handedly taking out all of the villains in the water section. This time though, they have to face against all of them, and Izuku would be playing his part phenomenally. Like right now, he would be in front of the heroes and just be kind of pretending to like take out the villains. And he's going all out, he's using the explosions and stuff, and Shigaraki just looks at him and he would be like, what? He's taking out the heroes. I mean the villains. He's not supposed to be on their side. But Izuku would look at him and wink, and Shigaraki would understand. This is when Shigaraki would say, Nomu, kill All Might. As suddenly the Nomu would finally reveal itself to all the heroes, and the Nomu would then begin rushing in at the direction of All Might as they begin clashing fists instantly. Izuku at this moment would proceed to essentially look at the direction of Shigaraki and then, go in there to try to fight him, and on purpose pretty much begin fighting sloppily so that it doesn't look like Izuku's actually on the hero side, right? Just to make it look like he's really on the villains, but All Might knows what this really is, so he doesn't question it, and all the heroes begin trying to essentially take out Shigaraki and Kurogiri. But because they would be put on such a bad back foot, Shigaraki would inevitably have to scream out, Kurogiri, get us out of here, as Snipe would shoot him 5 different times in different spots, and Shigaraki would make his way through the portal, leaving Izuku to look at him and kind of try to essentially get in the way of the Nomu. This is when Izuku would get in and essentially just watch as All Might would single-handedly destroy the Nomu and send him flying, going plus ultra, as he uses a Texas Smash, I think. Regardless, he uses something, right? And it would end up sending the Nomu flying meters out of the USJ. And after this happens, I wish I could just tell you that it was cleanup, but because Izuku is actually part of the villain organization, I have to tell you guys what happens there. Now, Shigaraki is going to be there with All For One, and he's going to be telling him how it seems like Izuku was really on the hero side. And Izuku would then be teleported in by Kurogiri to tell All For One that he's out of his mind if he thinks he's with the heroes. He would look to Shigaraki and say, remember your place. I'm the real son. You're just some lame imitation that he's going to use to get under All Might's skin. And from here, Izuku would go on to walk away, as he would say, I did my best. It's not my fault that you can't lead the organization the way that we wanted to. If I was to reveal myself now, we wouldn't get another opportunity to kill All Might. Plus, there will be more. Remember, the sports festival is a thing. However, I don't think we should attack then. So let's wait for the next big event that will happen, and this time we'll make sure to take more precautionary measures, more Nomus, more villains, and less Shigaraki. As from here, he would walk out of the room, and All For One would sit there to talk to Shigaraki and be like, look, I understand your concerns, but I'm sure that my son is very well capable of handling himself and the threat of All Might. Just listen to what he says. We'll get them next time. This was simply a practice run, a failed mission that shouldn't concern us. And from here, Shigaraki would grit his teeth as he says, yes, master, walking away with an angry look on his face and a scowl that would scare anybody, honestly. But Izuku at this moment would go up to his room and text All Might it was a success. They still think I'm on their side. All For One would still be none the wiser, and Izuku would continue being able to go to school for the next following days, and when inevitably, the school comes back in 2 weeks. And after this, they would be announced to the UA Sports Festival, which Izuku would already know about courtesy of All For One, not to mention the fact that Izuku has watched all of the sports festivals for the past couple years. And Izuku was even given a written note of all the weaknesses of all the heroes that are in his class, as well as the weaknesses of All Might, which of course he does know about the scar on his left side, which All For One kind of knows about, but not really. But because of this, we would be able to essentially, we would essentially be able to just jump into the USJ, the US Sports Festival, with Izuku being one of the front runner-uppers for the first race event that's going to be held place. Now, who's going to be actually giving the speech this time? It's going to be Izuku, just because he was actually the one who used the explosion quirk and was able to actually go around and get as many points as he did, right? Now, Izuku, as of this moment, is still using his cover as, the kid with the explosion and stuff like that. So he's not currently able to display his other multitude of quirks, just because he doesn't want people to get suspicious or anybody to be like, yo, that's weird. Like, how does he have so many quirks, right? But because of this, Izuku would be able to get past everybody. And since Bakugo still can't use his explosion, seeing as Izuku's undercover, Bakugo would actually be in charge of trying his best without actually showing his full strength quite yet. But Bakugo wouldn't really care, because he's gotten so used to not having a quirk that not using it every now and then doesn't really bother him. Plus, he's still kind of training with it, trying to get it readapted to his body, seeing as it's been gone for so long, and it's almost as if it's not an extension of his body, because the quirk in and of itself has changed so much ever since it was in the possession of Izuku. But all that said, Bakugo would still end up getting pretty high in terms of the ranking of the people who come in, and when it comes to the teams, Deku would actually end up opting to get Bakugo in his cavalry thing, with Bakugo actually being at the head of everything, and Izuku using his explosions to keep everybody away. Now, Todoroki would definitely try to use his ice to pretty much take that headband, but Izuku would actually be smart enough to just allow Todoroki to take it. He's like, you know what, whatever, let's just go for the little guys. And so they would rack up enough headbands to end up in 5th place. Not last, but like second at last, right? And so they would be able to comfortably move on to the 1v1 battles, which this time around are still going to be taking place in the order that they were in the original, starting with Deku versus Shinso. Now, the first quirk that Deku would see in display, which is Shinso's quirk, would actually definitely entice Izuku. And so what he would do after the battle and after defeating Shinso would be that he would opt to actually try to take Shinso's quirk. He would actually think that Shinso's quirk could actually be very beneficial, and that it could be one of the main things that could actually help them in the defeating of All For One once and for all. So Izuku would decide to go up to Shinso as soon as his battle would be over, and when he would catch him alone, he would pretty much take him into another room where Izuku would rip Shinso's quirk out, use a memory wiping quirk that he has, and get rid of that part where he took it away, make a copy of the quirk, keep it for himself, and then give Shinso his quirk back, all in the matter of 1 minute. And after this would happen, Izuku would pretty much walk out the door only to see Todoroki in front of him. Todoroki would tell him not to get too cocky and that he's going to be beating him as he walks away, and Izuku would exit the room looking to Todoroki, just kind of thanking his lucky stars that Todoroki didn't enter the room or anything, right? But regardless though, what would end up happening following this is Izuku would get back into the ring, and he would now have to face off against my bad. I had a burp. But against Todoroki. And, Todoroki would be in the ring just all serious faced and everything, just kind of thinking to himself that, this is it. I finally get to face against the kid who everybody thinks, stronger than me. Todoroki would just being Todoroki would literally just sit there and beat Todoroki, if that makes sense. And the battle would commence. How does the battle go? Well, it's really not going to be too crazy, because obviously we know that Todoroki likes to start his battles off in the sports festival with a bang, and he usually started it all off by shooting a gigantic iceberg at his opponents, right? Now, he would still do this just because there's no real reason to change this, and so Izuku would simply using explosions would be able to destroy the ice in a similar fashion to what Bakugo did, just crushing it, getting closer and closer to Todoroki as Todoroki would shoot more and more ice at him. Izuku, using his abilities, would be able to ultimately get close and closer to Todoroki, and because he doesn't end up getting the speech from Izuku about how it's his quirk and not his dad's, he would still lose just like he would have lost to Bakugo. Bakugo would have ended up getting to the second round before being eliminated by whoever his opponent would have been. And actually, I don't know, because no, let's just say he gets past the finals, right? I think he could beat Uraraka, realistically speaking, but I'm really not sure if he could actually defeat Tokiyami, who is his second battle. So I'm just going to be saying that for this instance, Bakugo's not going to be getting to the finals. I know I just contradicted myself like 3 times, but people, bear with me. Anyways, though, what ends up happening following this is essentially we end up just getting a scene where Izuku is going to be in the finals against Tokiyami, and we've never actually seen a battle like this, but because we know that Bakugo's quirk is the perfect counter to Tokiyami, I'm just going to be saying that we're going to give this one to Izuku, and that it would just be a kind of lopsided battle just because Izuku is literally the only thing that could counter Tokiyami. Like, he's his kryptonite because of the light power that he displays. He would also have a flame ability that he definitely would have stolen from some random villains, and Izuku overall just has a bunch of hidden quirks that he just never reveals. He has a ton of potential, and if I'm being realistic right now, I would say that maybe if he would steal more quirks and be more sure of himself, he would actually probably be able to actually take out his father in a fair 1v1 battle. But I'm not quite sure because his father is a lot more cunning than him, and he does have way more experience with the quirk of All for One than Izuku could ever imagine, even though Izuku has a far stronger version of it and also has a bit more quirks than him, because, you know, Izuku can actually hold way more and make them even more powerful, right? Plus, not to mention, he could actually copy quirks if he doesn't want to fully just take them, right? But because of this, we would actually end up getting a moment where Izuku's getting the medal, and All for One would be watching, just thinking to himself that his son definitely plays the part of a hero well. Maybe a bit too well. No, I am your father, and as your father, I know best. Ever since Shigaraki told me about how it seemed that you were overplaying your part with the heroes a bit too much, I have found it a bit suspicious. And you know, I've been keeping tabs on your current tasks and everything you've been doing. Currently, it doesn't seem as though you're trying to kill All Might. It seems as though you're simply trying to live out some sort of fantasy of becoming some hero, winning the sports festival, being a part of the reason that All Might couldn't win. Izuku would stop him there and say, "What are you getting at, father? You think that I would betray the League of Villains? Betray you, my own father? You disgust me. The fact that you even think that I would do something as pitiful as that. To think that I've been getting a hold of more and more quirks which could help us get a better control over the heroes and dominate All Might once and for all. I even replicated the quirk of that of Shinso, the one who could actually use a mind control quirk. With this, we could play with the heroes, have them underneath the foot of our boot, and we could even control them to do things for us that you could have never imagined, father. To think that I would have done all this, gone to so much lengths for you, only to be doubted. I'm your son. You should never feel this way. You disgust me." He would walk out of the room, and All for One would simply stand there as, you know, just complete silence, thinking to himself that maybe he is wrong. Maybe he was overthinking it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And so, All for One would decide to tell Izuku that to prove that he truly is on the side of the villains, he needs to actually kill a hero. That it's been quite a while ever since Izuku was tasked with one of those missions, and his father needs to make sure that he's not getting soft on him. He needs to make sure that Izuku is still the cold-blooded killer that he's always been. And so, Izuku would have no other choice but to essentially tell All Might as soon as he can through a phone that All Might would have actually given him that Izuku will need him to actually organize a fake death among the heroes. That it's almost time for them to finally take out All for One, and that for now, he just needs patience. And to please get a villain, like any hero, to like just go on a fake hiatus. Anybody. And so what would Izuku do? Well, it's simple. Izuku would decide to actually take out a hero which would have agreed to the causes, which would actually end up being Best Jeanist. Now we know that around this time Best Jeanist would have actually been taken out by All for One, so I don't think that it's going to be too much of a loss if we get rid of him, one of the top 5 heroes and actually kind of prove to All For One that Izuku is actually about it. So when it would be around nighttime, Izuku would actually end up causing a crime, which Best Genius would respond to and use All For One's quirks to actually defeat Best Genius. He would use his his fabric quirk and stuff like that to use tensile strings to essentially try to hold Izuku and make it all look like a real thing. And Izuku, he would proceed to essentially, with a mask of course, be able to use the abilities of All For One minus the explosion quirk to essentially use a mind control quirk and make Best Genius essentially off himself in a fake fabricated type of way, which would then go up on the news and Izuku would say, "So father, you convinced yet that I'm not some traitor for the heroes?" All For One would smirk and would say that he's sorry for doubting him, but it's better to be safe than sorry. And for now, he would tell Izuku to go back to his quarters where he will be awaiting his next mission. And Izuku, as of this moment, would get a text from All Might asking him how long exactly until the next attack. Izuku would say that for now he's unaware, but most likely they're going to be doing it once they go on their forest training camp. So as soon as that's there, they can finally take out All For One. They'll ambush him. Izuku will make sure that his father will show up, and that's where they're going to be taking care of All For One. Continuing the story where I left off in part 3, I think it's a safe bet to start off with Izuku's internship opportunities as well as his pro hero name. Now when it comes to Izuku's name, I think that I'm going to actually be leaving that up to you guys, and whoever gives me the best name in the comment down below, I'm going to pin you, and that's going to be the name that Izuku gets for this series. Come up with something interesting and keep in mind that Izuku has All For One. Maybe you can use that as some sort of gimmick for his name. Other than that, I think it's safe to continue on to who his internship opportunity is going to be spent with. And because Izuku himself isn't exactly going to be doing too much during the internship opportunity, it really isn't going to be mattering too much. So I am going to be saying that he does get one internship opportunity from Aizawa. And I think that it should be a safe bet for Izuku to actually join Aizawa when it comes to this internship opportunity, just because I think that All For One would definitely enjoy this, and I think that this is something that All For One wouldn't question too much. He's going with a hero that has an erasure type quirk, and that could definitely help them in their defeation of All Might, their ultimate end goal for what they've been doing this entire time. And that's pretty much just what we're going to be talking about when it comes to Izuku and what he does when it comes to the internship. That says though, I think that Izuku is definitely going to get Aizawa in on the plan, and Aizawa is going to, since he is one of the most understanding characters in MHA, I would like to say, I think that we could definitely have him understand what Izuku's coming from and have him actually be one of the role key players in the ultimate defeation of All For One. So Izuku is actually going to be replicating the quirk of erasure from Eraserhead, and now he's going to have even more quirks under his disposal. He even has Hagakure's invisibility, which is something that he didn't think he would actually end up replicating. Even Laser Beam's naval laser, except Izuku modified the quirk when he stole it, seeing as he can make quirks better, to instead shoot the naval laser out of his eyes, which I think would definitely help Izuku with the cause. Not only that, but Izuku also has these morphing type quirks where he can actually steal the quirks of people who can transform their bodies, and Izuku has like a sort of Zoan type devil fruit kind of quirk where he can actually turn himself into a gigantic leopard. I think it's sick, and I definitely love the C0 characters from One Piece, so I decided to give him that one very, very quick ability, which I think would actually be a very, very dope bonus to him. But overall, during this time, that's exactly all Izuku would be doing, taking quirks and learning a couple of things from Aizawa of how to stay undercover, how to not get caught, and telling him to stop using that phone because that's a one sure way to get caught. Telling him that he needs to be more sneaky with his ways, and telling him that he needs to spread out what he does and make sure that he stays on All For One's good side. So for now, he needs to make sure that Izuku acts as evil as possible and doesn't try to exactly get too much attention on himself. Telling him that if he was All For One, he would have also been suspicious by now, with him saying that he's unsure of whether he really is on their side or not, but regardless, it's better to trust than to not trust, and potentially be one of the key factors in why the plan of defeating the greatest villain in the MHA world won't work. So for now, Aizawa is going to be helping train up Izuku a little bit, and once the internship opportunity is over, we're going to cut straight into the final exams, which are going to pretty much be a not so important event. Why do I say that? Because I mean, it's final exams, dude. Nobody cares about that. Obviously, we will see a battle between Izuku and All Might, but because I don't want Izuku to kind of get the attention of everybody else, Izuku's actually going to be having to face off against Principal Nezu. Let's say that Izuku has to face off against Principal Nezu, and because Nezu knows of the plan, he would quickly allow Izuku to actually win, right? He wins at the event. And what would end up actually happening is that Izuku would end up making it forward to the Forest Training Camp. Now, once they get to the Forest Training Camp, All Might would actually be present this time, as well as more heroes, which would actually end up arriving covertly. Like a bunch of heroes end up arriving at the Forest Training Camp arc because Izuku would have actually briefed All for One in on the fact that All Might will definitely be there, and that this is their one big shot to definitely take him out. Izuku will be in charge of luring All Might out somewhere, and once he does that, All for One will be able to essentially use Kurogiri to teleport All Might to a different location, or so that's what everybody's thinking at the moment. But little do they know that there's generally a ton of heroes on standby at that exact location, ready to ambush All for One. This is the final day that All for One stays a free man. The final day that All for One can control Izuku Midoriya's life. But for now, the training camp continues as usual. All the students would end up arriving, being left on the cliffside of a mountain, and from here be forced to make their way towards the direction of where the training camp would actually start. Izuku would get a little bit tired from this and inevitably make his way towards the area where he begins cooking, and everybody has a pretty good time. Izuku doesn't interact with Koda much just because he's too preoccupied on All for One and things like that to be worried about some kid who looks a little grumpy. So this time Izuku's not exactly going to be making that same connection with Koda, and I do think that this is something that isn't exactly going to affect the story too much. So I think that for now we can generally keep everything as it is currently, and we can pretty much just jump into what will happen as soon as nighttime hits on the third night, which is where the attack on All for One is actually going to be taking place. How do I see this playing out? Well, essentially, I know that I told you guys that Izuku briefed All for One in, so Izuku is pretty much going to fake lure All Might out to an area of the forest that is actually quite far for some secret nighttime training. And All Might will be completely oblivious to it, quote unquote, right? And it's at this moment that All Might begins to essentially use his quirk and, face off against Izuku. And Izuku would actually end up landing a pretty crucial attack on All Might at this moment, weakening him as, All for One would finally receive the signal to teleport in. And once he does, All for One would immediately blitz in and shoot black tendrils into the direction of All Might, which All Might would catch and be sent back flying, saying, "All for One, what are you doing here?" All for One would clap as he would begin to essentially start clapping at Izuku, saying, "Great job. For a second there, I wasn't sure you were going to be able to make the cut, but it seems that I was wrong." He would then proceed to say, "Come to me, Izuku." As from here, Izuku would get a villainous smile on his face as he walks towards the direction of All for One, and Kurogiri would attempt to actually teleport All Might away. But before he could do that, the hero who in the original would have actually restrained Kurogiri, which was Edge Shot, would come flying in using his quirk and actually restraining Kurogiri, as multiple other heroes would make their way onto the scene, and it would be All for One versus Endeavor versus Fat Gum. Literally even the hero that was pronounced dead, Best Genius, would be there, as they would use all of their quirks at the same time to shoot a massive attack at the direction of All for One, which he would dodge with a shield, and Izuku would then be looked at by All for One with this just feeling of intense hatred in his eyes, right? But Izuku would not care. It's at this moment that Izuku would say, "I betrayed you, but you betrayed me first. When you took me away from my mother and you stripped my dreams away from me. It's payback time, bitch." As from here, Izuku proceeds to jump back, and using Eraserhead's quirk would erase the quirks of All for One, as All for One would be left there a defenseless normal man, and All Might would come in to blitz and land a thunderous blow on All for One, which would knock him out completely, as All for One and Kurogiri would immediately be taken into the Tartarus prisons, and all of the rest of the members of the League of Villain organization would be captured, all of them, including Dabi, Twice, Spinner, Toga, every single main key player. So the only person that we have left now is Shigaraki, who without All For One's guidance is not exactly going to be making it too far. I don't think that he would even be able to successfully even do a jailbreak mission, so I don't even think that he's worthwhile of considering with this plan. But Izuku would have came out with a gigantic W on his father, being the one who was capable of bringing All For One to justice, along with the help of a couple of heroes. All of them on this day would have ended up capturing All For One, and Izuku would finally now be free. All Might would tell Izuku that he's proud of him, and Izuku would say that he couldn't have done it without the help of all of them, thanking Beshinus for his efforts in his fake death. And from here, everybody would essentially go and begin cleanup, as the Forest Training Camp arc would be canceled due to the fact that they have to do a little bit of investigation on all the villains that they caught, and the area is overall just not safe. Eventually, the plan would come out to the media on why Beshinus faked his death, and everybody would understand, realizing the threat of All For One. Following this, we would end up having Izuku come out to the media and his true quirk, as Bakugo would now finally be allowed to use his explosion quirk, and all of the rest of the school activities, with all of the other students asking if it was a bit cruel if Izuku stole his quirk. But Bakugo from here would clear the air out and be like, no, he didn't steal it from me. When we were kids, Izuku didn't know how to control this quirk, and he ended up accidentally taking my quirk away. I don't consider it theft if Izuku wasn't sure of what he was doing. So I think that it's fair that we all should forgive him for that. Plus, he did bring in one of the craziest villains of all time to justice. So I think that for now, I'll just let it slide. And following this, Izuku would smile at Bakugo as he would say, "Thanks, Kachan." And from here, everybody would just return back to normal school stuff, with the first thing that they go back to pretty much being the provisional license the provisional license camp arc, right, where all of them go and get their licenses. And it would just be a very, very wholesome arc where Bakugo would finally be able to use his explosions, and because he doesn't have the same cocky personality due to the fact that he wasn't cocky this time around, he would actually not be rude to the people and end up passing. When it comes to Todoroki and Inasa, I think that Todoroki would still fail due to the fact that he does have some unattended issues within himself and Inasa that he just needs to take care of. So he would end up having to go back to the course where he has to try to, kind of make a good case on why he even should deserve one. And Inasa would as well, along with everybody who would have failed in the original, meaning Kami. But regardless of that, from here we end up jumping into the arc where we actually get to meet Mirio, right? And this time around, Mirio would actually end up telling Izuku that, he's actually pretty impressed with what Izuku did and how much he actually helped in the ultimate defeation of All For One, saying that had it not been for him, they might have had another crazy villain running amok, and that Izuku should already be a pro hero, that Izuku's actions are more than many pro heroes could have done in their entire careers, that Izuku is, a pro hero in his eyes. Mirio would say that to Izuku, but from here he would go on to pretty much challenge the entire classroom to a fight in which he would destroy and dismantle each one of them, kind of showing that he is just way more powerful than them due to the fact that he has experience and the fact that he has more gusto, and he has just learned different fighting styles to cope with his quirk, right? But because of this, we would end up jumping into Mirio versus the Clash, right? And I do, generally speaking, think that Mirio would overpower everybody except for Izuku, because once Mirio comes in to try to actually attack him, Izuku, using one of his many multiple quirks, would tap into the invisibility factor, and from here would go on to copy one of the characters who can actually make clones, making a clone of himself as Mirio attacks it, and Izuku would have full reign to use All For One in a short burst, and one for all in a short burst, and land a thunderous blow to the gut of Mirio, as Mirio would fall down onto his knees, phasing back into the ground, and Izuku would wait for Mirio to come back out. However, using one of his danger sensing quirks that he would have ended up actually taking during the time where he spent with All For One, would end up easily being able to dodge the attack, and therefore shooting a laser beam at Mirio, which would nearly decapitate the dude. But Izuku would actually miss on purpose, and Mirio would have a sort of kind of like a, how do I explain this? He wouldn't have like a bright smile, but he would have kind of like a, oh wow, like that was that was close smile, you know what I mean? And Izuku from here would be told that he is most definitely the winner. Following this, Izuku would actually be given the opportunity to take the internship opportunity with Sir Night-Eye, and Izuku would actually accept. He thinks that it's a great idea to go intern with the man who actually worked side by side with All Might. He would love to work side by side with All Might, but because he doesn't have, the ability of healing him, and All Might still has his time, he won't exactly be learning too much other than punches and kicks. So for now, he's going to be interning with Sir Night-Eye, and the situation between Mirio and Izuku that we would have gotten in the original, with Sir Night-Eye thinking that Izuku isn't worthy, would actually not happen. Because if anybody's worthy of the quirk, it would be Izuku, the son of All for One. Somebody who has the quirk of All for One and One for All. Izuku once for all would have broken the cycle of hatred between both of those quirks and would have finally brought them back together once and for all, for something good. This time, not for a huge battle that would span from generation to generation to generation and from user to user, but finally now be put to rest and have this strange rivalry that the both of them have had this whole time finally come to an end. This is the finale of What If Deku was All for One's son. But before we get into that, we have to handle the one last mini boss, which is Overhaul. And when it comes to the Overhaul situation, what do I think would happen here? Well, generally speaking, we know that Overhaul still this time is going to be out with Eri trying to chase her because she escaped, and Mirio and Izuku are still going to be on standby. This time around, I don't think that Izuku would allow Eri to just go back and listen to Mirio. This time, I think that Izuku would actually take things upon his own accord and actually end up trying to save Eri on his own. And Overhaul, as soon as he would let out his devilish intent, Eri would try to go back to him, but Izuku would say, "You're never going back to that man again," as from here, Izuku can kind of see a little bit of himself in Eri, just due to the fact that he also had to spend his childhood with somebody who he didn't ever want to be there with. He never wished or wanted to be with his father growing up, and he never asked for any of the things that happened, but it just did. And Izuku just kind of wishes that he can give a better path to this girl, one that he never had access to. So he would immediately blitz in at Overhaul, and he would think to himself that this is personal, immediately using his quirky erasure quirk to inevitably end up handling Overhaul and blitzing in as he would pummel him with attacks coming from One for All in every direction. Overhaul would be completely out of the picture, and from his jacket pocket would drop a couple of bullets, which Izuku would be able to quickly examine and take to the police department, where they would find out that they are quirk erasure bullets. Izuku from here would find out what he was using Eri for, and it would disgust him to the bottom of his heart. It would just be horrible. How could you do that to such a little girl who hasn't even had time to live her life yet? She didn't willingly offer herself to have this stuff done to her, and every time that Overhaul tried to use her quirk, he had to literally dismantle and break her. That's a fate worse than death. And that's something that Izuku could never possibly imagine on himself or anybody whatsoever. Izuku would have a genuine disdain for Overhaul, and he would actually plead that Overhaul could actually get the death penalty, as well as pleading for his father to have the same, and having his mother actually reunite with Izuku. Because now that All for One is out of the picture and wouldn't be able to control the strings, Izuku would end up using the abilities of the Japan police force to actually locate his mother and bring her back to Japan. Once she would find out this news, tears would begin coming from her eyes rapidly as she would hug her Izuku, and they would reunite once again for the first time in who knows how many years. But Izuku would end up having the best day of his life, being able to see his mother once more, being able to just be in her presence and have the gift of his mom being around and have, a great day with everybody in general. This would pretty much end up leading Izuku to having a little bit more of a happier ending than we usually get in these what ifs, and Izuku would actually end up having a sort of happily ever after scenario where he would go on to become the #1 hero for years to come. And due to the fact that he would have a aging quirk, that would mean that Izuku has the capability of staying young for a long time, not forever, but something quite similar to what All for One has, where Izuku doesn't age rapidly and he would be able to remain on top for years and years to come. Izuku ultimately would end up having a son, and this time around Izuku would do everything right, making sure that his son has everything and anything he needs to succeed in life, whether it's to become a hero, to become a doctor, anything. Like Izuku will make sure that his son gets anything that he ever wants. And so Izuku's son would finally step into the limelight years and years and years later, and that, ladies and gentlemen, would be the end to What If Deku was all for one son. I do hope you guys went on to enjoy this what if, seeing as it actually had a lot of work and thought put into it, and I would genuinely appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on the movie version of this, and if you guys are watching the movie of this, I'd appreciate it if you guys just slapped a like, seeing as it genuinely helps so much with YouTube's algorithm. You guys have no clue. And with the way that the algorithm hasn't been pushing me lately, it actually comes a long way. Like for Christ's sake, like the last time I ended up having a video that had like 2K likes on it, and the algorithm still didn't push it the way that it used to push my videos. Like, that's insane. But regardless though, tangent aside, I do love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.